Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Just to let you know, all participants will join today's meeting with muted microphones, as you may have noticed. If you could rename yourself to include your first name, your last name, and affiliation, should you have one, that would be fantastic. To participate in this discussion, if you could use the raise hand button, that would be great. That can be found at the bottom of your screen, depending on the version of Zoom that you have. It may be under the reactions button, or it may be in the participants window. So if you cannot see it, it is probably in one of those three places. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And I forgot to mention that a little bit laid back in this meeting, feel free to mute and unmute yourself. And if you have any technical issues, you can get in touch with me, Matt Archer, via the chat box at marcher@ctps.org or at 857-702-3708. And with that, Len, I will throw it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And maybe we can just go into gallery mode until Kate does a presentation, in which case we can take a presentation. Is that okay?
Sure, that sounds good.
Thanks. And so I'd like to welcome Kate Victor into our meeting. And I apologize, Kate. I suspect you had a little problem getting in because that link was incorrect.
No problem.
But we're right on time, and I know you need to go at 3 o'clock. So I'll let you then introduce yourself as part of your presentation to us. Okay.
Sure. Well, no, thank you, Len. Thank you so much. And no apologies needed. It's amazing to me that any of this works at all. So I'm just really happy to be with you guys. I always enjoy my chances to meet with Artec. And actually, it was funny. I heard recently that Jeff Gonneville spoke with you guys, and I was like, when am I going to get my invitation? And then not too long after that, I did. So thank you for having me back. I am, so a couple things. So I am Assistant Secretary at Massdot. I've been here a long time. Know many of you, have worked with many of you on different issues over the years. I work on a wide range of things, many of which fall under sort of the general heading of things other than the private single occupant automobile, and encouraging the use of different means of travel, particularly public transit, but really lots of different things. And for the last almost year and a half or so, I have been running our Shared Streets and Spaces grant program, which I think I may have spoken about last year, which has really been a kind of splendid example of state and municipal partnership around changing streets and curbs and plazas and parking to make streets a little more usable by everybody and not just by cars. It was a program that really started directly in response to COVID, but has continued on to my great happiness. And I know that the MPO is providing a similar type program to emphasize some of the same issues. So that is great too. So I am going to actually use some slides today that I have sort of developed and used to talk about kind of how we think about climate and specifically how we think about it as a DOT. And kind of one of the issues is that state government, at least as I experience it here and as I see it elsewhere, is sort of not well set up to deal with issues around climate change and GHG emissions and decarbonization, sort of precisely because those things are cross-cutting and they cross across our sort of traditional silos and traditional ways of thinking about society and the economy. And as a result, there kind of isn't a clear way to grab onto some of these issues. So I will stop for 1 sec to see if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I will dive into the slides. I do unfortunately have to leave at 3. I'm meeting with Tesla because one of the things we're working on a lot here is electric vehicles. But happy to answer any questions here while we have time, and always to take questions by email if that's helpful too. So let's see, can you guys see that? Yes, okay, thank you. So because of this audience, I don't need to explain to you what a state DOT is or what our particular sort of mission and parameters are. So I will roll right into the first slide. This is a list that I am sort of continually adding to as I work more and more on these issues. So please feel free if you think something is left out. But these are sort of the starting places, at least for me, when I'm thinking about transportation, mobility, and climate. And for these purposes, what I really mean, and I try to get at this in the second bullet here, is we often use the language that the transportation sector is the greatest contributor to carbon emissions in the US and elsewhere, also in Massachusetts. This is true, completely true. But I feel like the language that we often use sort of condemns transportation or movement more generally, when I think what we really want to say is that the problem are the emissions from the particular fuels that we use and the vehicles that we use. Secondarily, from the land use patterns that we have that kind of force people to drive more than they might otherwise need to. But I always want to be clear, like mobility is actually a good thing. Mobility provides opportunity, it keeps the economy going, it keeps people's lives going. Transportation per se isn't so much the problem as kind of how we do it. Oops, and it says my internet is unstable, so let me know if I disappear. You know, a lot of work has been done in the electricity sector. Anybody who follows renewables or offshore wind or everything that's going on knows about that. Buildings as well, also hard. Transportation, however, is particularly sticky, and the answers are particularly challenging in transportation, or the lack of answers. A whole bunch of reasons for this. To me, probably the most important is that there isn't a single or small number of regulatory actors in transportation that we can sort of try to regulate the way you can in electricity and to a lesser extent in buildings. It's all of us every day, all of the decisions that we make about how we move around, what vehicles we buy, where we're going, how we're going, are we going with somebody else, are we staying home, all these different decisions. There is no single force in society that really controls those except in sort of individual or indirect ways. In addition, people are very particular about how they get around. These are very personal decisions. It's not quite the same as your electricity provider. Anything you do to change travel, whether it's vehicle type or how, you know, people really feel it and they don't like it, which is something that we've learned. So that is another one of the huge challenges in this. Another thing, something we all know, benefits and burdens of the transportation system are not equally distributed across Massachusetts or across anywhere. And that is something we have to be really aware of when we're thinking either of sort of tinkering with how people travel today and thinking about kind of where are the places where we need to be focused, because pollution has been a particular issue there for years. You know, division of communities by infrastructure has been a huge issue. Lack of infrastructure, lack of mobility choices has been a big issue. And just to say again at the end, a strong mobility system is really, really important to a healthy society. So we're not looking to sort of cut away transportation, we're looking to change it. So folks may know this, but just sort of a quick primer. There is a regulatory framework in Massachusetts around which, or sort of within which, a lot of this thinking is happening. We are in many ways one of the most advanced states to actually have legally binding, regulatorily determined declining emissions caps for different sectors and different gases. It all tracks back to the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2008. Every 5 years, the Commonwealth issues a clean energy and climate plan, which really kind of lays out the policies and the caps that we use to implement the Global Warming Solutions Act. There was one underway right now that I think is supposed to be issued this summer. That is really going to need to include some policies that have teeth related to the transportation sector. And developing those is really challenging and is work that's going on right now. And some people may be aware of the Kane versus Mass DEP lawsuit. This was a big issue in my world. Basically, it reaffirmed that the Global Warming Solutions Act is legally enforceable. We have been sued over it. We could likely be sued again if we don't meet the standards that we ourselves have set. All of this has also been sort of amplified by work the legislature has done recently, including the climate roadmap that was passed last summer that people may be aware of. So I think sort of thinking specifically about our universe, the universe of transportation and mobility, I think a really important place for all of us is to understand that we have responsibility for how the things we build are used. And this has a lot of relevance to a lot of different areas, but I'm speaking sort of specifically here about emissions. When I first started working in transportation, which was more than 20 years ago, which is impossible to believe, I think we felt like, you know, we built stuff, we run stuff, how it gets used, what effects it has on the economy, what effects it has on the environment, what effects it has on social equity, not our bag. You know, there are other people who work on those things. Our job is to build and maintain infrastructure. And in many cases, the infrastructure that we're maintaining, you know, pre-exists any of us. And so it's our job to kind of keep it functioning. But I don't think we have the luxury of kind of resting in that place anymore, whether it has to do with road safety, whether it has to do with emissions, whether it has to do with social justice. The things we build and maintain and operate are too fundamental to other pieces of society. So we really do need to pivot to a place where we understand that we have responsibility. Doesn't mean that we have the answers, but we do have a role to play in this. We can't just kind of walk away from the things that we build. And that's really tough. And it's particularly tough in Massachusetts because the connections between transportation and land use are so integral, and they're completely differently managed and regulated, such that we are producing like very, very different, very, very difficult, distinct, and distorted social, economic, and transportation outcomes. And I could talk about that forever, which I would be happy to do, because I know this is a group of folks who are interested in kind of what happens at the municipal and regional levels. But it is a huge, huge issue that is, I think, one of the single greatest impediments kind of to making progress on some of the stuff in Massachusetts. I think it is also important, and I talk about this more on the next slide, but we talk a lot about sort of individual choices. Do you choose to buy a car? Do you choose to use the T? Do you choose to buy an electric car? Do you bike? Do you walk? You know, do you raise your children to drive? All these different questions. And many of us, and I will admit myself, we can become like really judgmental about people's individual choices. Do you live in the suburbs? Do you live in the city? All these different things. The reality that I think we really need to think about is many people, there are not a lot of choices. Like we don't have a lot of choices of housing stock. Many places are not affordable for most people. We don't have a lot of mobility choices. People are trying to make the best decisions they can. Actually, I will go ahead because this is where I talk about this here. I think really it's a very American thing to kind of focus and like sort of bear down on the individual and say it's all about individual choices. It's really not. It's about the system that we are creating within which people can make choices. And that system is one of land use, housing, and transportation, all of which kind of rolls up to the emissions situation that we have. But we really do need to understand the decisions that cities and towns make about permitting or not permitting housing, decisions that the state makes about, you know, widening a road or not, decisions that get made around the placement of, you know, important activity generators. These are big things and they all interact, and any one person within any of those systems does not have perfect choice about kind of how they move around, where they live, what they do, how they get to work, all of those kinds of things. So, you know, one thing that we talk about a lot is, you know, we need to give people choices other than driving, which I completely believe in and which is something I work on a lot. But we also need to recognize that there are places where choices other than driving, and particularly other than driving alone, are probably not particularly viable. And a lot of that's about density. If population density is too low and things are too spread out, you know, those places are sort of designed for the automobile, or the automobile is designed for those places. We have all tried and been part of many experiments to provide transit in the suburbs, to, you know, force the construction of sidewalks and bike lanes, all of which I believe in. But we need to recognize that it's not as simple as just saying, well, people shouldn't drive, they should do something else. Because we can make that the policy, but if we don't give people those options, and if the places where they live are not amenable to those options, all we do is sort of make people's lives harder, when people's lives are often hard enough, without really seeing the changes that we want to see. So what are we doing currently at Massdot as a DOT in a world in which all of these issues are still pretty siloed, even though we're sort of starting to find ways to work across them? So we work a lot with our environmental partners on electric vehicles. We have not historically, but we are doing so more and more. And the new infrastructure bill will give us a good amount of money to do even more of that, which is exciting. And I am like really eager for Massdot to begin to take more of a kind of muscular role when it comes to electric vehicles. As folks may well know, the MBTA is moving aggressively after a long time, but they are moving aggressively to electrify their bus fleet, which is great. You know, maybe there is an electric future for commuter rail. It's certainly not right at hand, but there are hopes and dreams and ideas to try to incrementally electrify parts of the network. We really do try to understand behavior. Why are people going where they're going? How are they getting there? Where are there opportunities to shift modes? It's not everywhere. There are places that are sort of the right combination of density and trip patterns where maybe people shouldn't be driving. Maybe if we gave them better walking or biking or transit infrastructure, they would use it. It's not everywhere, but there definitely are places. We assume that people are making the most rational decisions for themselves in most cases, given what they have in front of them. We recognize that there is a big disconnect between public concern about climate change, any polls you see, people are very concerned about it, but then actually kind of understanding the structural reasons that drive emissions, particularly related to vehicles. We have a big focus on what we call short trips or everyday trips. I think something like half of the trips in the greater Boston area are under 3 miles, and a large percentage of that are under a mile. Those are trips that we really should be capturing, not by driving and not by driving alone in many cases. So we are trying to figure out how to provide the infrastructure and the encouragement to make that more possible. And we're trying to find ways into the land use and housing kind of arenas so that we can help to kind of emphasize the importance of keeping all of these things linked. Oh yeah, so here I have the quotation or the statistic about short trips. Other things people may know about at Massdot, we have the healthy transportation policy. It's been around for a decade or so now, requires all Massdot managed projects, including projects that come through the MPO, to include safe facilities for walkers and cyclists. This has been a game changer. We're constantly, adjusting it and trying to make it as kind of responsive and effective as possible, but it has really changed how we do things. We have a whole bunch of programs, including the Shared Streets program that I mentioned at the beginning, to support municipalities to change their roads, to make them better and safer and more inclusive. We really believe that there's a lot that can be leveraged in our kind of historic urban form in Massachusetts, urban and suburban and rural form. They're natural places that were in many cases built before the automobile, where people can walk and bike and do other things without cars. The Trails team, which if you guys haven't, you should definitely get a presentation on. Big state level effort to build more and more off-road trail projects. Really exciting. Doing a lot with that. And we had been, before COVID, we had been sort of gearing up to do another household travel survey. We're way behind where we should be with that. It's been on hold for obvious reasons. But we are certainly thinking a lot, as I know you guys are, about what the future may look like for mobility. And hopefully we will eventually get back to being able to do a survey. And that's it for me, at least for this part. Please don't be shy. Please reach out. Sorry, that was like a million miles a minute, but I wanted to get some stuff in there before my time ran out. So happy to answer any questions on this or anything else. I hope that was at least mildly interesting. And yeah, how can I help?
Well, first, I want to say it was very interesting.
Really?
And as soon as we can have you back, we will, because I think we had communication been better, you would be able to spend more time with us. So I'll be in touch with you soon after to see if we can get you back later on this year. So with that, do I need to wait for Mr. McQueen to raise his hand? No.
I will confess, John and I have been emailing, so.
Hi, Kate.
Hi.
Thanks a lot. Terrific as always. A lot of questions, I guess. I know that the emphasis in this phase of the program, or this iteration of the program, is to not limit mobility or movements, but to some degree, there's some disincentives can work also. Mm-hmm. And such as, vehicle miles traveled being something that's measured and let's say used like a utility meter, kind of charged, because that also captures road degradation from mm-hmm. any of the most, because that's needed, and it would capture it among electric vehicles, which mm-hmm. would contribute to it as well, or congestion price, or fares on the MBTA, which actually is an expansion of mobility. Does it have any, are those things still on the table? I mean, the fares I know are on the table, but vehicle miles traveled and privacy and that kind of hurdle has always been, but technology is there to keep it blind, I guess, in terms of the individual and their habits. That's one thing. And to perhaps, in terms of the goals, to limit and to expand it versus the personal single occupancy, to make it personal vehicles, which would not just be single occupant, but would include miles traveled, period, by personal vehicles. and might be a little bit, by that inclusive, might either incentivize people to economize on and group their trips or things like that, but knowing that they have to contribute to society and the infrastructure, it might be a little more inclusive in terms of revenue capture as it's needed. And I guess the other question is, where are we in terms of the goals that were set out for emissions that were set out for 2020, for instance, back in 2010? I mean, are we close to our goal? Have we exceeded our goal in terms of reductions or whatever?
So let me take those sort of one at a time. I think, so things like congestion pricing, things like VMT pricing, those are obviously decisions that live in the arena of the political sphere, not
Right.
mine. I guess the one sort of maybe more academic thing that I've just sort of observed, and this is not just true in Massachusetts, is there are these conversations that have been going on for years and years about sort of how do you use pricing? Do you use pricing to kind of or raise revenue for the transportation system, or try to use it to manage behavior, which generally means like encourage people to drive less? Those two objectives are at odds. So we need to kind of sort of decide, if we're going to do either of those things, do we price the transportation system because we need money to raise, we need to do what we do now, which is to use it to support the system, or are we actually trying to use it to limit people's driving? If you actually want to limit people's driving, the prices, it seems, need to be a lot higher than they do if you're just sort of like,
Darling? Yeah.
what?
Whoops.
So I think it's, I think that is the thing we've been kind of caught in a little bit, which is like, which are we trying to do? And how you would design it and price it makes a big difference depending on what you're trying to do. But the bigger issue, which is again outside of my sphere, is that time and time again, it seems like in Massachusetts and in other states as well, people kind of reject this as a mechanism. It's just, I worked on the last, many years ago, the last referendum related to the gas taxes. It went down in gasoline soaked flames. This is just not a place that as a society, we seem to be comfortable. I think some of that is because people are price sensitive in general for obvious reasons. I think for reasons that I only sort of understand or only partially understand, driving is a particular place where people are really, really sensitive to what they perceive as sort of government intervention related to pricing. And I also think because many people have no choice, and you could design a sophisticated program that tried to protect those people. But it gets awfully complicated. And I think when people are sort of thinking about it as a policy, they do worry about that. So I will be very curious to kind of watch the future of Massachusetts and see if these discussions move. But they have not in my tenure so far much. In terms of the emissions numbers, I have to check. I think the last numbers we actually have are from 2018 or 2019. That the inventory is always way behind. So I made a note to myself to check where we are relative to where we expected to be. And I assume you're citing some of the older CECP.
Green dot.
Yeah. I looked at that stuff last night and I'm actually not sure. So I will check with that. I will check on that too. Okay.
Thank you. You're great.
That was a very long answer. I don't know.
Oh, it's a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions here. And due to time limitations, I think Steve's questions is going to be the last one. But like I said, I will work to get Kate back as soon as possible, like within the next 3 to 6 months.
Anytime. No, I'd love to.
So Steve?
Okay. So Kate, everything you said was really great. It's nice to feel that, Massdot really gets it.
We're getting there.
Yes, definitely. but I detected less enthusiasm when it came to commuter rail. You seem to think that that's not as easy. Well, there was less enthusiasm there. I was wondering why. Is it just some reason? What reason does that exist? And is just that you feel it's harder or more expensive, or that would just, why would it take longer, or shouldn't be an equal effort along with electrifying buses and things? Or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think a couple of things. I think electrifying the commuter rail system is incredibly expensive, much more than I mean, the buses are expensive too, but commuter rail is multiple billions. And as much as I believe in some of these things, it's at some point you really do need to start to measure like the cost per ton of carbon eliminated, and it's wildly expensive when it comes to commuter rail. And commuter rail at this point has a kind of larger existential problem, which is like, who's using it and for what, and is it really the system that we need? What it was built, the kind of sort of travel patterns that it was built for may or may not continue to exist. It's certainly been a lesson for me in the risk of sort of designing very large fixed infrastructure that really sort of best serves one purpose, because when that purpose goes away, which it may or may not, it's not nimble to try to change it into something else. So I would hope that at some point the commuter rail system does shift over to electric or biofuel or something, but it is intensely expensive. And for the relative, if you're looking just at the carbon benefits, it's not super clear that it's a winner. But there are other reasons to do it as well, which is part of why I would hope we might get there eventually. We're starting to talk a little bit about other types of hybrid fuels that could be kind of a bridge. So there's
the most elastic kind of demand thing where if you really get it working better and work it properly, you will get a whole lot an increase in ridership. And I don't know if you always take that into consideration. Just kind of think, no one wants it, but I think if you get the right connections going and the right modernization and the right things, that will happen. And are you aware of what's being proposed, that they're talking about dual mode, where it's electric, but the second mode is batteries, so that you don't have to electrify everything. So that should bring down the cost by quite a bit by not having to electrify the entire system.
That would certainly be
with wires, that is.
Yes, that would be a lot better. Yeah. I mean, I think that the future of batteries is a hugely important piece of this. And I'm not on sort of the sciencey side of these things, but battery capacity is clearly a limitation, just on everything from our cell phones to our trains to everything else. So that's a place where we should all tell our children to get into the battery world, because there's going to be a lot of work to be done.
And just fixing the problems of like the North-South rail link and putting it all together in one thing would be such an increase in ridership that's the only way you're going to get those costs down to be more comparable to the other modes. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah. And in addition to telling the children, to work with batteries, I mean, we should really focus on the next generation when it comes to changing policy, because I think they are a lot more amenable to some of these things than my generation. And so we can get them to realize that you can get what you want if you participate in the system. Then I think we have some hope there. So with that, it's 3 o'clock, Ms. Victor.
I know, Tesla waits. Speaking of batteries.
so yeah, and tell them if they want to come and talk to our techs.
They might.
We'll be happy to have them. So especially tell them there's someone who really is into autonomous vehicles. Still is. I don't talk about it as much. Still there though. So alrighty. Well, thank you once again. And we'll see you around.
Thank you, guys. I'm so sorry to have to run, but I really look forward to coming back. Thank you for listening, and absolutely email me anytime. You know where to find me.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
well, take the presentation anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay well.
Sure. And by that, Matt, I meant she could send me the presentation. So I'll send an email me, but I'd like to get the presentation to the group so we can read it more easily. So with that, let's do a round of introductions. So I will just call your name and you can tell your affiliation, and because after this we have Sandy to talk with us about the UPWP, to take study suggestions, and that will be it. So I will start with. I'm gonna go down my queue here. John McQueen.
Oh, John McQueen, Walk Boston.
Okay. John Stewart.
John Seward, move Mass.
Okay, I didn't hear that very well. John Stewart, what?
Move Mass.
Moose Mass. Okay, great. Andy Reeker.
Good afternoon, Andy Reeker with the City of Cambridge. I'm in the community development, that is the planning department, and I'm a transit planner.
Great. So we have a phone connection here. The last four digits are 7495.
Hi, Barry Steinberg, Association for Public Transportation.
Hi, Barry. You should have recognized that number, huh? So Laura Wiener.
Laura Wiener, Senior Transportation Planner for the City of Watertown.
Great, thank you, Laura. Don Martin.
Hi, Dan Martin with the Brookline Transportation Department.
Thanks, Dan. Derek Cravat.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Derek Cravat, Massdot Office of Transportation Planning and Massdot liaison to the Boston MPO.
Excellent, thank you, Derek. And David Montgomery.
Good afternoon, everybody. David Montgomery, Town of Needham.
Thanks, David. Fred Mosley.
Fred Mosley with the American Council of Engineering Companies.
Thanks, Fred. Jen Rowe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. My audio's been funky all day. I'm with the active transportation team in the city of Boston.
Great. Thanks, Jen. And let's see, people popping up in my queue again here. Marilyn Wallens. I'm not seeing the mute. I'll come back. Stella Jordan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stella Jordan. I'm the Public Outreach Coordinator at the Boston MPO.
Thanks, Stella. Nice to meet you. Stephen Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, Town of Westwood, also representing the Trick subregion. And if you haven't guessed, a regional rail enthusiast.
And Todd Corain.
Todd Corain, Transportation Administrator for the Town of Brookline.
Great, thanks, Todd. And let's see. It's going to go back to catch a name, but Marilyn Wellens. Okay, still not there. And so, Matt Archer.
I'm Matt Archer, MPO staff.
And Scott Zazakis.
Scott Zedekis with National Rural Transit Assistance Program and also the vice chair of this group.
Great, thanks. And I'm Leonard Diggins, and I represent the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee. And now I'm going to call on Sandy Johnston last. He'll tell us who he is and then take it away.
Thanks, Len. Excuse me. Thanks, Len. Sandy Johnston. I'm a transportation planner with the staff of the MPO, where I wear a number of hats. I manage the transit working group. I am our freight planner, and I am also our outgoing Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP manager. As many of you know, probably almost all of you have had some interaction with me in that role over the last 5 years or so. Our new UPWP manager, Srilekha Murthy, is unable to be here today for this conversation, but she will be coming back to introduce herself to the advisory council, hopefully at the next meeting. So for now, we're just going to talk a little bit about what the UPWP is. We'll keep that short since I think all of you know, and talk about developing some study ideas for the upcoming UPWP. So I'm going to throw a few links in the chat. First is a link to the page on the UPWP on the MPO website. Then we have a link to the what we call the development page, which has a calendar for the development of next year's UPWP. The UPWP functions on a federal fiscal year cycle. So from October 1 through September 30th. So we're currently developing the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP. I will advise you that this webpage is slightly out of date. We are not having a UPWP committee meeting next week, almost certainly, as it says. It'll probably be a week or two later than that. And then I will throw a couple more in a moment. So right now we're at a stage where we're kind of gathering a whole bunch of ideas for what we should study. Most of what gets funded through the UPWP, which is the document that lays out how the MPO is going to spend the planning and analysis funds it gets from the federal government each year, goes to keeping the lights on and doing the core functions of the MPO. But we have a certain amount of money each year to kind of play around with and do new studies, new analyses, that kind of thing. And there's a whole process involved where we do a bunch of outreach and then go through a discussion with the MPO's UPWP committee, which the chair of the advisory council, that is Len, sits on, and eventually come up with a list of studies that meets the needs of our community, that it meets the MPO's priorities, and that work for us from a staff perspective, because we need to be able to allocate resources among staff. This year, I think everybody's particularly excited about it, just like we are on the infrastructure side, because the infrastructure bill that Congress passed does provide additional planning funds. We're not quite sure, excuse me, exactly how much money that's going to be yet. You may have heard that Congress is trying to pass a continuing resolution. I believe it's passed the House, but not yet the Senate, to keep the government funded. But that because it's a continuing resolution and not a full budget, that is going to delay full apportionment of the dollars from the infrastructure bill. And so we're not going to have a total idea quite yet. But we're looking at perhaps a 15 to 20% bump in our planning funds that are available this year. So it's not insubstantial. And we're hoping, we don't know exactly how that's going to be used yet. To a large part, that's up to the PWP committee. And we're taking advice on all of it, up to the MPO board. But I think we can guess that some of it is going to end up going to some extra analysis and planning work. So where we're really at right now is soliciting ideas, and that can be anything. We are obviously soliciting ideas if you want to write up a whole proposal and send us a page or two, but it can just be a sentence or two, some bullet points. And I'm happy to have a very open-ended conversation, as you know I've done here in the past. Do this meeting every year, and just hear your ideas, and we'll write them down and take them back and put them into the document that we call the Universe of Proposed Studies. So the universe looks like this. I'm putting a link in the chat again, which should take you to a particular page of an appendix of the UPWP. It basically is a giant spreadsheet. It should take you to page 19 of the PDF. It's a giant spreadsheet that takes a couple sentences about each study concept, gives some notes, estimated budget, and then relates it to the MPO's goals and objectives as laid out in the long-range plan. That's going to be the end result of this conversation. Now I'm going to say one last thing, and then I will shut up and let Len Collin folks ask questions, which is that we have a public-facing survey out as well. I just put the link to that in the chat, and I'm sure we can send it around in a post-it meeting email as well. This is open really through the end of February, but the sooner you get it in, the better. And it basically asks to do the same thing we're going to be discussing today. So you are all welcome to submit ideas individually. Please, if you have mailing lists, or contact lists, send this around. And I know the advisory council has traditionally submitted a letter and some study ideas as a group as well. So I guess, with all that background being said, much of which I think most of you didn't need, I'm going to hand it back to Len to facilitate a conversation here.
Thank you, Sandy. And I'm not thinking that we're going to send a letter as a council. I'm suggesting studies this cycle. So I urge everyone to not hold back at this meeting, but certainly I can understand that you may not have ideas now, and maybe some ideas may come as a consequence of the discussion here. So you can take that survey, and if Sandy didn't say it, I'm sure he would have said it. You can send me, him and answer like a email. So with that, I'm going to ask people to make suggestions, and I'm going to hold off because I have a bunch. Okay. So I think that's Barry. And then I have Laura.
Yes, can you hear me?
You can hear you. I'm going to turn off my video so that I'm not looking weird.
I have a question. I'm sure that anything you'd be studying is not a brand new subject. So therefore, one would think that some of the past studies could still be in play.
That would be the same. I'm sorry. I thought you were done. What was that? What was the rest of that, Barry?
I just want to know if is that true that that you're not starting from zero every time.
Right. And so that'll be the Sandy and Matt. Can you go in the gallery mode, please?
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly, well, we do start fresh with some analyses. We have some are of what we call our recurring studies, which are kind of studies that happen every year or every other year, and those are largely like traffic engineering, complete streets type studies. But we are also looking for kind of brand new ideas as well. If there are ideas that you or anybody else has submitted for past UPWPs for us to consider that did not get funded, we will also reconsider those each year in the new UPWP development process.
Thank you.
And so Laura?
I have two ideas. One is one that I've mentioned before, and that is like trip generation, but also more parking estimates for it's really data collection for lab buildings and in settings that are not suburban. I think for anyone that works with projects where they do traffic studies, the ITE numbers are not very useful or always seem to overestimate the amount of parking that's needed and the number of people, the percentage of people who come by single occupancy vehicle. And it would just be so useful to have an alternative set of data. The other idea that we've been thinking about here in Watertown is having some kind of a transportation infrastructure fund where we ask developers to make a contribution rather than each one figuring out who's going to put in some of it is like street stuff, like, who's going to put in a traffic light? Do we need a traffic light in that location? But the other things are, we have a new shuttle that we've recently launched, and it's very expensive, and a Blue Bikes program that we're working on building. So like, is this done elsewhere where there's just like a set dollar amount that developers are asked to contribute for reducing SOV travel, or how is that calculated? Who decides how it gets spent? Just all the questions around kind of a different way to leverage development for transportation improvements.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. For the second question, I actually have a paper I'll send you after the meeting that we turned up when we were doing our research on trip generation a couple of years ago. Montgomery County, Maryland has a really interesting and innovative, not exactly an impact fee. I forget exactly what the technical term is they use, but instead of asking developers to kind of pay specifically for mitigation at their site, developers pay into a general fund for transportation infrastructure and service improvements. And there's kind of a pre-selected list of projects that accompany the planning, the long-range planning that the county does, because all of the planning there happens at the county level. And so people know what they're getting. Developers know where infrastructure improvements will be made if they're going to build somewhere. And the whole thing kind of is less ad hoc and more planned out and a long ways in advance. And they've written up a really nice TRB paper about it, so I'll send that to you. But definitely something we'd be interested in looking at as well. And I know you and I have talked about the lab idea as well, and we know that's needed. I believe MAPC is looking into doing some data collection about it specifically. And we also have our trip generation study during this fiscal year, which is currently scoping. I think that's going to be more policy side, but we can also, remind them, Ben Senkowski, I think, is going to be running that study. And I can remind him this is something that you'd like looked at and see if we have any ability to collect some data on it.
Thank you.
It's interesting that you brought up MAPC, because I was kind of thinking this might be more of an MAPC kind of study too. And then I was thinking, well, on what grounds am I saying that? And so can you just kind of maybe help us understand the extent to which the CTPS interacts with the MAPC staff when coordinating what studies to do?
Yeah, so I think that kind of waxes and wanes over the years. Right now, we're actually working on setting up a regular coordinating meeting with MAPC's transportation staff because we're working on a lot of topics that have some overlap, but we're really trying hard not to duplicate each other's work and to complement it. And I think that level of coordination has gotten a lot better in recent years. I think it's not a secret that in the past there's been a lot of institutional tension there. But in my observation, that is decreasing, and the amount of collaboration, especially at the staff to staff level, is really increasing. And we're working together on a lot of things. MAPC, as many of you know, gets 20% of the federal planning funds that flow to the Boston region through the UPWP. So they have, they're required to go through some of the same processes for reporting, and they often do bring their work products to the MPO as well. And of course, they have expertise that we do not have on staff on land use, development review, kinds of things that we as just the MPO staff do not quite have the same level of expertise in.
Right. Well, thank you. So I'm going to take Andy next, and then I'm going to ask Matt to check the chat for me, and then maybe highlight anything in the chat that seems appropriate to bring up at this point, because if anything that maybe someone's sending to me, because I can't really do chat and messages at the same time. Thank you. So Matt, I'm sorry, Andy. Yeah.
So definitely we have a similar struggle in Cambridge that Laura just kind of spoke to. Just as a piece of information, I think I've heard that Montgomery County kind of model doesn't necessarily work within not Cambridge, within Massachusetts, just given the laws that we have here around kind of setting up those kind of almost like a benefit district for zoning purposes. But we have tried in a few other ways of trying to get specific infrastructure funded by development commitments in the more traditional Massachusetts contracted zoning way of doing things. So, there's definitely maybe some research that would help us that maybe CTPS or MAPC could do. So I would definitely voice my support to the concern that Laura is just saying, that as municipalities, we kind of all have our own ways of doing things, but maybe there's one or two better ways that we should all kind of coalesce around doing when it comes to development review. I think additionally, before the pandemic, I was very excited by the Rail Vision process. And, I may be second in line after Steve Olenoff about, pursuing the kind of regional rail ideas, but I'm wondering if maybe some of the UPWP project could be diving in a little bit further into some of those concepts. Cambridge, of course, has been long interested in service on the Grand Junction. Are there other kind of near-term things that, beyond just what the MBTA has already committed to do with doing some pilots of electrification or things like that, but could those ideas be studied so that we kind of have a pipeline of further ideas beyond just kind of the first 2 or 3 things that the MBTA has already committed to that could start up in this UPWP process? I think that's one thing that I'm thinking of based on that Real Vision plan. And then I think secondarily, I know just kind of last year, with the UPWP review that we did, we definitely, as an advisory committee, felt like the 2 areas that didn't seem to get a lot of attention was around resilience. So climate action and resilience, and maybe active transportation. And so with the additional funding, I think those would probably be holistic priorities, just given that the current UPWP didn't necessarily get at some of the projects that we were most excited by, just as kind of a general frame of reference. So those are a couple of the thoughts on my mind at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Just want to respond briefly, start with your last point. So in the discrete study section of the UPWP last year, the one where we're like choosing studies to do during that fiscal year, we didn't have any specifically resilience linked studies, but we did establish a new budget line, permanent budget line for resilience planning for the MPO. And it started with a small amount of money in fiscal year 22 this year, which actually turned out to be fortunate because the person we had designated to lead that work has left. But my understanding is that that's basically number one in line for new hiring and expanded resources with infrastructure bill funds. So I think, and that's, that's going to be a permanent feature of the work we're doing at the MPO going forward. And I think everybody's very excited about that. Active transportation, yeah, I think that's true. I will say that we included active transportation elements in many of the studies that we did do, especially the one about curb use really focused a lot on that. And we're, of course, doing a, part 3 or part 4 of that this year, but we'll take that under advisement. And I will also just say, about regional rail, I think probably that the MPO has traditionally been reluctant to take on things that the MBTA is actively planning and working on itself. Obviously, different MPO board members, different staff folks have different feelings about that. I will say that, as somebody who wrote his master's thesis on modernizing commuter rail, I would be thrilled to do some of that work. I'm sure I would be involved in it and would be thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about something that I know a lot about. But obviously we'll put it in the universe and we'll see where it goes. But just a word of caution, that has traditionally been the MPO's attitude towards such things.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. I would say it's something that a lot more about, because apparently you know a lot about a lot. So we're gonna take a little break here and for chat. So bring us to chat, Matt.
Sure, absolutely. So I do see that John McQueen has his hand raised, but he put something in the chat. So John, hopefully I'm not cutting your legs out from under you. He just noted that transportation funds and mitigation is usually negotiated by a town as community benefits, and BPDA follows this process. And we also received a comment from David Montgomery. I'm sorry if you can bear with me, working on a laptop, not used to having such a small space. David Montgomery noted, or just said, that he echoes Laura's question about transportation improvement funds and would love to know of anyone who was doing this successfully. And he thanked Laura for the question and the potential information.
Okay. All right, thanks. So with that, I'll have John McQueen and then Franny next. Franny Osmond next.
Thanks, Lynn. Sandy, on the, I guess it's always on there, is the future of the curb. If there could be a dimension that deals with either the disruption or the impacts of some of the increasing delivery vehicles, that large ones that in some cases, not just on city streets, so let's say it's single lane or 2-lane city street, they'll just park. And it disrupts things and maybe causes accidents. But Amazon Prime, UPS, some of the Stop and Shop home delivery type services seem to be proliferating at a huge rate and making themselves a large factor, and one that perhaps merits some attention in terms of what they can cause or versus the benefits. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and John, you are speaking my language. As since I'm the freight planner now, I have to advocate for the inclusion of that kind of consideration in these studies. And I have made it clear to the folks who are running our Future of the Curb work that we are going to be including curb delivery elements in that. And I would also point to some really exciting work that MAPC is doing around e-commerce deliveries. Travis Pollock and Allison Felix over there did a really exciting and interesting report on e-commerce warehousing last year, and they're doing some follow-up work that's going to include more in-depth research and also some delivery elements this year. So I think there's a lot of energy around that.
Great, thank you.
Nice. So I hope you make it as clear to them as you make it as clear to us when you say that study's never going into the anyways. So we have Freddie Osmond next.
Yeah, I don't know if my ideas for studies fit into the type of studies that are actually done with UPWP, so I'll just throw them out anyway at the risk of embarrassing myself, Sandy, which I've done before. Because they're not as general in covering many, many areas, but they would be sort of representative. First of all, I would just second Andy's concern about regional rail electrification and north-south rail link, and that that possible extension to southern New Hampshire that Scott Sudeikis is familiar with from his work with the plan group, the New England plan. The connections, it's always connections between RTAs, and I'm not sure how we could maybe study them more generally, but the places that I'm concerned about are the cross between the Lowell Regional Transit Authority and the MBTA. There have been discussions recently about how to connect a certain line up to the Bedford VA, and that affects also Middlesex Community College. And the LRTA administrator says, well, he thinks it's a good idea, but we have to look for funding elsewhere because he doesn't have enough money, and the RTAs just don't have enough money. So so that connection specifically, I've been saying for years, and also the inter-RTA transportation between Framingham and Lowell, which goes by so many communities, workplaces, retail places, housing developments. I mean, it's just unbelievable where, and places that need employees. Anyway, that kind of connection. That was all that came to my mind when I thought of things that I wanted to see studied. I'm recently was brought to my attention that some studies or some projects are in Massdot and some are in the Boston MPO. I'm always thinking about the federal money that Boston MPO has, but I hadn't really thought about how that compared in size to the rest of the work that Massdot does or the MBTA does. So I would love to have a good sense of that. I'd love to somehow get a presentation that sort of laid out all of the funds that come federally and statewide, and showed us, helped us map it out and have a sense of how it's being spent on what. So.
1 second, I'm just taking some notes on what you said. Well, I'll start with the last one again. And this probably sounds very familiar to Jen, because she, years ago when she worked at CTPS, proposed doing a guide to all transportation planning and funding in the Commonwealth. And that idea has popped up here and again, over and over again. It's never gone anywhere in particular, but we can put it in the universe again and see what happens. I personally, in my opinion, it would be a very, very valuable thing, because I've heard that request so many times. And obviously there is a need to, for people to understand, because like we're talking about the resources that the MPO has here, but they are pretty small compared to the overall chunks of funds, both on the planning and the capital construction sides, that get spent in Massachusetts as a whole. And yeah, I mean, Franny, I know you and I have talked about some of these RTA connection ideas, and obviously it's really important and something the MPO should be taking a look at. I think where we're going with that probably is maybe being able to tackle it through our transit working group in the coming year or two. So I'm sure you and I will be in touch on that, but we'll also keep these ideas circulating for the UPWP for now.
But also, I think like the sense of how much the MPO has to spend versus Massdot, I think that's in the preface. I mean, if not the LRTP, I think if not in the tip, then the LRTP, I've seen it. I mean, so I'll see what I can find in the near term. I mean, with respect to how much Massdot spends on planning or studies versus the MPO, I don't recall seeing that. I will say that the Boston MPO, in comparison to all the other MPOs, is much larger, much larger. Yeah, let me first off see if I can find a source of information. The fact that Sandy didn't just call out one makes me wonder to what extent what I find will answer what you want. Franny,
I will say that the planning side is very complicated. The capital side, because Massdot puts it all together in their capital improvement program or their SIP, and that includes both federal and statewide funds. That's much easier to deal with, but the planning side is more complicated.
Okay, I got you. So all right, well, yeah, we good request, and I might actually. So might be one for MAPC, or maybe even some other entity, you know, or some other process other than, you know, the UPWP, you know. So so with that, I'll stop talking and have Anna Christina Fragosa.
Well, sorry about, I was a little late. No, I was just gonna say that I started working, this was gonna be our third part of our workshop at the Federal Reserve Bank about, there's a company that specifically works in a tri-state area with Connecticut, New York, and I believe, I forgot what the third one is. I know it's Connecticut, New York for sure.
New Jersey?
It might be New Jersey. That typically, I think, what they do consider the tri-state, but they do go down to Washington as well. It's a private firm, and he wanted to come do a presentation, so we were going to host it as our part 3 workshop. And I found out that in Massachusetts, these private third-party planning groups, they come up against hard barriers. There's a lot of hierarchy and politics involved. So it kind of gets a little, they have to dance very lightly, but that is part of the biggest problem with planning, because I personally have been on this, like, how does the right hand know what the left hand is doing? You know, it feels kind of chaotic to me. Like, why can't there be an overall picture? But I guess that there's some issues with people here that, you know, you just have to step lightly. And that's why you're not really seeing it. But there are third parties trying to push for this to happen in this state, to have like some more of just an oversight as far as planning with the states around us, never mind the smaller, you know, RTCs. And that's it. Just kind of like a little opinion.
Yeah, thanks for that information. You know, so Jen Monroe.
Yeah, hi, I just wanted to express my continued enthusiasm for the idea of a very easy to follow for the uninitiative data visualization of transportation funding, both where it is coming from and where it's going to, and who decides, like has various degrees of influence over those decisions, I think would be super helpful. And I think could be, with a lot of the different data visualization tools that we now have access to, could be pretty interactive and interesting. And then I guess on a somewhat related note, I also just from our speaker earlier, got me thinking more about a study to look into not only what those sources of funding have been, but also what possible sources of funding there might be that we could explore, and how those different sources either cause positive or negative externalities in terms of mode choice and our climate goals. So that's a lot, but take that all on.
Yeah.
Got it.
So when you say affecting the funding sources affecting I mean, it's funny. I mean, I kind of understood every individual word, but when I put it together, I think I missed something. So are you saying the third party is the nature of the problem? I just didn't understand it completely.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. It's me. I'm just being slow. Yeah.
So I guess Kate Victor was talking about how, on a broad sense, there are some of our funding sources for transportation also have the side, like for example, the gas tax have the side effect of making driving more expensive, and therefore have a help us achieve some other goals. Some of our sources of funding are just, you know, funding from the feds that comes from, you know, our income taxes and whatnot, and those sources aren't necessarily also helping us achieve other goals. So anyway, just looking at where the different sources are, where different sources could be, and how those different sources have other effects as well that we may want or may not want.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, well, it's just slow. I mean, so thanks for taking the time. I'll be being so willing to explain it to me so nicely, you know. So, Franny?
It's funny, I wanted to answer something that, and I totally forgot. So I'll come back. And I'll put my,
happens to me all the time. Yeah. So if you think of it, just raise your hand, or blurt it out before you forget it again. Okay. So all right. Anything else you gotta say?
No, it was just that one crisp thing.
It'll come back. It'll come back. So just kind of like surf your memory. Don't try to like dive in.
I know what it is. I know what it is. I remembered. It's the idea of putting a guide to funding is the type of thing that I probably would glaze over. But if it had included in it how we give input, it's like I finally sort of understand, okay, there's the MPO, and then I can somehow have input either by showing up at meetings or by commenting online or by participating in RTAC, which has a seat on the MPO. And, there's different ways of interacting with these things, but I don't have any idea about the rest of Massdot and what the methods are. So if there's a guide made, it would be nice to include how your average resident can participate in the process.
Well, yeah. Well, hopefully by the time it's done, most likely by the time it's done, I will no longer be chair. But hopefully that chairperson will make it a reading assignment for the advisory council one of its meetings, and you'll be a part of it. I'll be a part of it, and we'll read it and discuss it. And Christina, were you done, Franny? Okay. And Christina, and then Steve. All enough?
No, really quickly, just to Jen's want of maybe seeing something more visual, a representative percentages of the budget where it's getting programmed. Is there anything that they can do with Mass Mapper, the old Oliver system, where they can, they put everything else in there. You can get tax parcels. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to assign a particular municipality a certain percentage color and print that out, and then you'd know visually. It would be a heck of a map. It would have to be large to really give any useful information. And then to Franny's point, well, actually that kind of answers both, really. I just use the GIS. But for funding from Mass, like as far as a guide, I think it's basically when you see something programmed into the tip, that's where you can have input, is when there's time to comment on the tip and the LRTP. I think those are the only times you can make an input of an actual comment, and that's why certain projects are more of a priority for the state. That's where you're going to see it, correct? Am I frozen?
No, you're not. No, we're hearing you. I just didn't have an answer for you, and I was just kind of thinking if that is only well.
If I can just jump in for a second, Len.
Yeah, please.
The TIP and LRTP and the MPO documents only cover federally funded projects. There's also a whole constellation of state funded projects. And, projects do go through environmental review. There's always public meetings, that kind of thing. So, when they're funded and that's, just one part of the whole process of bringing a capital project to completion. So there are other opportunities for input throughout, but yes, it is definitely often quite opaque.
Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate it very much. Steve?
Yeah, so I noticed one of Jen's things was household travel study, and the CTPS has done household travel surveys in the past, and they do them regularly, but it's like every 10 years, which is kind of ridiculous. In the MAPC regional plan, the Metro Common 2050, there's actually an item in there, and I know I have to work on it. It's that they should be doing that regularly, even every year. And instead of doing one big survey every 10 years, they should be updating it every single year and doing that on a regular basis, so that it is useful. So I don't know how that translates into a study or just a change in the way we're doing things, Sandy, but I just wanted to call that to your attention, and you can find it in the MAPC regional plan.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I didn't know that. I don't think you'll find anybody at CTPS who's opposed to doing it that way. And certainly I was glad to hear, and I didn't know that what Kate said earlier, that they're thinking of, that there was an effort underway before COVID to think about doing it again. It's obviously been too long. Like last time we had a household travel survey, TNCs as a mode did not exist and bike share barely existed. So it is well past time to do it again. It was like a multi-year, multi-million-dollar effort. And I know that from talking to my modeler colleagues, there's some hope that cell phone-based data can now replace some of that work, but it is not as rich as the household travel survey was. So yes, that we will, definitely pass that along as a priority for this group, because I think that'll help to nudge it along.
Yeah, we might have to do a big one, but then following that, continue it on yearly, updating it, so that you don't have to just wait such a long period of time before you have that updated information.
Yeah.
I guess it's a function. I suppose the function of how much the updates cost, right? So I mean, do you get enough information from the update, make it worth what it costs to do it?
Do you spend, 10 million every 10 years or $1 million every year? But which one gives you the most value? That's the kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, but I guess I don't know if the 1 million every year.
Whatever, I'm just throwing out round numbers, but whatever it is, clearly you may end up saving money doing it that way. But if not, you definitely improve the quality and the timeliness of the information that you get.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I mean, I'm not opposed. I was just kind of playing devil's advocate, I guess, if anything else. Kind of wondering if there's like a threshold or critical mass of spending you must do in order to get data that is of useful value. Even if it's considered incremental. So that's all.
I would suggest you guys bring in here Tim Reardon from MAPC, the director of data, and Marty Milkovitz, the CTPS director of modeling. Two very smart guys, and between them, they'll be able to tell you all you need to know about what you need to make a travel demand model go, and what you need that travel survey for, and what kind of data you need.
Yes, I agree. And I'll ask if they haven't seen too much of me already. So with that, I'm gonna rip into my suggestions. I'll stop halfway through. This is one of those cases where I'm kind of glad we're not in the room, so I can't see Sandy's body language as he hears these.
I'll just make exaggerated facial expressions.
It's like, you're never gonna get that study one. So, anyways, here we go. So this is actually following up, I think, on one of the Blue Bike presentations to the board, and it was that I think some of the stations a lot of stations are at the end of train lines, subway lines, and wanted to study positioning them at the end of major bus routes. So study that and see if it warrants at least a pilot of trying to locate more Blue Bike stations at the end of major bus lines. And this one, study pedestrian cross times at intersections, because I hear a lot from not only elderly pedestrians but the younger ones with kids that there's just not enough time to get across the street. And I think there are some standards or regulations about suggested amount of time, and I'm not sure to what extent we can change those on our own in municipalities. But anyways, it'd be nice to have some research into is the current amount of time enough, or is it? I could go on, but I can see you nodding your head. So I'm gonna stop because I think you got what I'm getting at, Sandy.
No, I think it's a great idea.
Okay, great. So I kind of mentioned this might be more of a policy thing. I mentioned this at a Right Oversight Committee meeting, MPO Academy of sorts, where we try to reach out to the community, and get people interested in what we're doing, and try to grow a set of residents that are ready to become more educated players, participants being in the planning process. And with that, we could try to, bring in the diversity from a younger age, and even if they don't become a part of the NPO, they just become more educated about planning and planning, transportation, transit. Let's see. My big thing is about how to make the entire transportation network a transit network. And let me just say transit and freight network, and how do we incent people to doing it? Because I really think incentives work much better, than disincentives, because if you make people want something, they want it more. If you make people not want something or try to stop them from using it, it just creates a lot of friction, and usually then people try to figure out a way around it. But I'll stop. Let's see. Okay. Exploring crowdsourcing as a way to collect data. So this could fit into maybe what Steve was talking about. Like there may be ways to get data that's less expensive, and utilizes enthusiastic people. And so not only do you get the data, but you also kind of foster some civic engagement. So I have about 4 or 5 more ideas, but I'm going to stop now in case someone else wants to say something. I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so I'll run through my last. So one is exploration of smaller footprint vehicles, and their effects on the roads and the curb. Because I have noticed in Arlington, there's this one little vehicle. I think maybe it's for parking enforcement. The thing is so small, it fits in a bike lane. And I think 2 people could fit in it. And I think it'd be great if we had more of those on the road. I think they have a less of effect on the roadway, and we could fit more. I think we could get more people on the roads if we had them in those, even if they were SOVs or 2-person occupied vehicles. And of course, in the long term, it'd be nice to connect them autonomously. But hey, let's just start with getting more of those on the road. And staying here on this freight in the curb, and a study on shared personal vehicles. And by that, I don't necessarily mean more than 1 person in the car, but or the vehicle, but just having a shared vehicle. Like we have with some of the it's not Hubway, it was I forget the name of the
Zipcar.
Zipcar, yeah, Zipcar. But maybe doing those more on municipal level, where they are spread throughout town, and people can access them when they need them, and drop, kind of like the Lime car version, or the car version of Lime Bike. You call it Lime Car, and factors. The last one is factors that affect cycling, and this could be a literature search. So what is it that make people want to cycle more? Is it bike lanes? Is it bike paths? And does weather play a factor? Age play a factor? So that's it.
Thank you, Len.
I had a couple of others.
Wait, can I just respond to Len?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
But I know we've talked about some of these ideas. Always love to hear them from you. I would just ask you to fill out the survey also, so that I have it in writing.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Can I just do maybe one-liners? For the time being.
However much energy and interest you have in writing it out, the more you write in the survey, the easier it will be for us to translate it into the universe.
Okay, so that was the answer I wanted to hear. So okay, fine, I got it.
I'm also going to put a link in the chat. I know John mentioned golf carts, and there's an article my friend Aaron Gordon, who writes about transportation for Vice, wrote last week about what he calls glorified electric golf carts as a potential future for the suburbs. And I thought it was a great article. So check that one out.
All right, great, thanks. So Franny?
Oh, I just wanted to add on, whatever happened to autonomous vehicles? So yeah, adding, you know, I know there was a sad tragedy, but they ultimately will save thousands and thousands of lives every year. So, what's happening with that?
I think I'm sorry.
I mean, my blunt impression is that everybody realized that the industry's boasting was totally overpuffed and they aren't going to be ready anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. It just means that it's not, 3 years away like people were saying 5 years ago.
I just want us to be prepared.
Yeah, of course.
I also want to, God, I must be tired today. Bicycle, I mean, yeah, bike trails with rails. We have a community out here who's ready to be a guinea pig. So I would love if our area would actually do a study of how that works. And you can test it out on the Littleton, Acton, Concord area. We're happy for you to test it here.
So trying to figure out how trains and bikes can coexist within the same right of way?
Just, yes, exactly. And yeah, I think that's it.
And my concern with AVs is that they are being developed, but they're being developed on the kind of SOV model. So you have a big honking vehicle with one person in it. And I'd like to see us really try to get ahead of that curve, which is what I was proposing all along. Is like, I don't know if they're going to be here as soon as people think they will be. Let's hope that they won't be, because if they are, as soon as people think they will be, it'll be autonomous vehicles like we have now. And autonomous vehicle mimicking, the current kind of vehicle that we have on the road. And that's just not what we want. Let's take the chance with this new technology to get a whole different kind of, model of using, automobiles on the road, and I mean, it may not, as Sandy says, it's going to happen, and probably what will drive us or accelerate development here is when some other country does it, and we're like, oh, we're behind the curve now. But anyways, so that might be it. Sandy, so
Anna Christina's.
okay.
Yeah, I just had a quick point to make. They may be modeling based on SUVs, but what most manufacturers are doing currently is they're looking to have ride share programs where if you pay, if you belong to the Ford Club, you can have this many vehicles, kind of like what is it, the Zip car model, where there's you pay and you can rent from that direct manufacturer. So the car is owned by multiple users and stays in, you depending on where you are. But the thing with that is there's going to be issues regarding socioeconomic classes of what kind of car club you can rent from. So that's something you want to consider too. If you're going to worry about just the car size, I think that needs to be looked at as well. That's it.
Thank you. It's good to know. So is your hand back up for any or not? No, I think not. Okay. All right. So when's the deadline, Cindy?
For the survey, that would be the end of February, but obviously we encourage people to get things in, the sooner the better. Right. I'm just going to put the link to the survey in the chat one more time.
Sure.
There, so that everybody has it again.
I'll try and get it to you by Valentine's Day, because you know how much I love the UPWP.
We always appreciate your passion, Len. And thank you, everybody. Always a great conversation. And you know where to find me if you want to have a follow-up conversation or just share some other ideas.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. We'll see you in Sri Lanka soon, I'm sure. All righty. So next is old business, new business, and member announcements. And I guess the chair's report. because we initially thought this was going to be a pretty tight meeting, and not much time to discuss talk about the previous board meeting. And what I will let me see if I can go back to screen to get the agenda. So we talked about the roadway safety targets for the Boston region. And this is an annual thing. And what I want to point out about that is that right now, the state is doing its next iteration of its highway safety plan and the strategic highway safety plan. And it's really a Vision Zero plan, 0 deaths and major injuries. And it's a huge undertaking. And I read the product of the last iteration. I was really impressed. And so I can't tell you right now where to go to find information about it. I'll dig it up and ask Matt to send it in. But I think if you do like a search on Strategic Highway Safety Plan Massachusetts 2022, you'll find a link to it. And I think they are still looking for people who want to participate in it. And so I just wanted to raise that as an announcement of sorts. And the approval at the board meeting was that the MPO would follow Massachusetts Massdot's levels of goals and that is a result of this highway safety plan. So instead of us developing our own set of goals, we would go along with the strategic highway safety plan goals, and I think they're very reasonable. Last year when we did this, I felt as if I was just kind of rubber stamping it and not really fully appreciating what that was, and it was when I realized that there was this highway safety plan behind it. I read it, and now I feel a whole lot better about supporting that decision, to use their goals. And this one is going to be, I think, particularly interesting because we are in the middle of a pandemic that's kind of changed things. Not only the way that we commute, but we've seen like a big increase in fatalities, and I think major injuries. So it would be like, how do we plan given this spike, and hopefully it's a spike, certainly this increase, and so that's it on that topic. And the other topic of interest to us would be the results from the transit working group pilot, and so there's a good report on that. I suggest that you read it. A decent amount of surveys, and input from the participants. And the upshot is that they're going to continue the working group, so it's no longer a pilot. And at this point, there are no plans for that working group to have a seat on the board. But I think a lot of good has come out of it, and I know that there was some concern in this group that this was a place for that kind of work to be done. But I think if you look at the amount of effort that has gone into it, I think Sandy's still here. I think the working group meets quarterly, and then there are coffees, if not every other month, then almost every month. I certainly get enough emails that makes me think it's happening every month, and so there's just so much more effort than I think we could have put into it as an advisory council. So I think it was a good idea, to have an independent group. We are able to participate in it, and so I would say if you want to know more about it, feel free to reach out to Sandy and or myself. But I think but check out that report that was done. It's very informative. So that's what I'll say about the last meeting. It's not on the agenda here, specifically, but one of the things that I was hoping that we could get a quick little update / plan of action from Franny and John regarding, Franny in the case of RTAs, and John to discuss how we're going to explore some big ideas. So Franny?
Yeah, it is on the agenda, but
Okay. Sorry.
we talked John and Len and I talked, and I don't have things to bring today, but the focus on the connections between RTAs and the experiments with microtransit in the RTAs, especially in lower density areas, is something that I want to look at and bring to this group. And I'm sort of curious how many RTAs are represented in this group. I'm not sure whether I should ask about where you live or where you work, just whatever you're most involved with. I'm just sort of curious which RTAs you cross paths with a lot. So for me, it's the Lowell Regional Transit Authority and Massachusetts. And what about others of you? I'd love if you would just sort of speak up or put it in the chat, and I can just sort of.
And I think at our meeting, you said that you would be willing to give a report every 3 months or so on what you have, right? And certainly anyone who wants to join Franny in this effort, we welcome you to do so. I mean, the point is that these two individuals are leading the effort, but hopefully they're not doing the effort alone. And I also point out to Franny that there is a report on RTAs, a future RTAs report that you've seen it. So it came out at the same time as the future transportation report.
Yes, actually, I was on that commission on the future of, it was the funding, performance and funding of regional transit authorities.
Yeah, it's really impressive.
Yeah, and there is legislation that I think did get through some step in the legislative process recently, the RTA funding, but the governor's particular budget doesn't, it's like $3.5 million less. It's not going up as it was proposed. So he has a habit of changing the last $3.5 million into performance-based grants. And that doesn't give the RTAs the money they need, which they really need like twice as much. So anyway, I'm looking in the chat. The MBTA, Metro West. I mean, we don't have that many RTAs in our area, but some RTAs like Massachusetts cross into the Boston MPO from other MPOs. So just the fact that they cross so much, and the sort of separation, the fact that RTAs tend to focus on their hubs because that's where they're better funded and that's where more of the need is, then the outskirts tend to sort of not get the attention they need, and people pretty much just have whatever senior van they have in their town, and then otherwise no hopes, especially for non-drivers, of having a full life. So those kind of things, that the connections, those things I mentioned are the things I'm going to be looking at. And so if any of you want to sort of keep an eye on the RTAs, I'm in the RTA Advisory Council, and we had a presentation from Alexis Walls, who leads that. That group is doing good things. So I'm glad that's there.
So what are they doing now that that bill was reported out of the Joint Transportation Committee with favorable action?
That bill would encourage enough funding. I don't remember the details, actually.
I was just wondering what they're doing now. So do they know
to where the bill?
So the bill was reported out.
What was the final bill title or number?
RTA advancement bill. I don't know the number.
It's a Senate bill or a House bill right now?
I don't know either.
House,
So I was just wondering what
You know what, I'll just put in RTA. I'll find
RTA advancement bill.
probably only like 10 pages.
Yeah, but
Anyway.
it's not so much that I am asking what's going on with the bill now, as much as it is what's going on with the group that is pushing for the advancement of the bill. So now that's been reported out favorably. Do you know what they're doing? Yeah.
No, and that group doesn't just support that bill, but just tries to promote improvements in the RTAs, not just funding, but just all sorts of improvements in the RTAs around the state. So there are people from various parts of the state.
So who leads the council? That council, the RTAA.
The RTAAC is led by Alexis Walls it's by Chief 4MA, but the person that was doing it, Enrique Pepin, just left there.
Okay.
And Alexis Walls of the Massachusetts Public Health Association.
So she's running it. Okay. All right. Please. All right.
So,
yeah.
So we'll see who else steps forward. Oh, look, thank you, Matt, for sending about the RTA advancement bill into the chat.
All right.
So anyway, so I'm no specialist, but if people want to keep an eye and talk to our group every 3 months about sort of what's going on with RTAs, we hear a lot about MBTA, and it would be nice to make it more of a whole. So contact me if you want to work with me.
Yeah. So start beating the bushes a month before the meeting.
And then John, you were going to, what was your part of it?
John's going to talk to us about big ideas. So how he plans to move forward with that. No, we're not expecting any presentation, just let people know how you plan to move forward.
Yeah, so Lynn's asked me to take this on to see how RTAC can be a bit more forward-leaning and produce more useful effort to benefit the activities of the MPO and be less reactive, and to think about the more distant future with everything that's changing around us, so that we're headed with transportation projects towards the best of outcomes there. And I'd really love to have anyone and everyone's participation in trying to figure this out. I don't have any answers myself, but it seems that we need to be thinking in that direction, and as an organization to be a bit less reactive than we have been. And so I think that members of the RTAC should meet every few weeks or monthly. And Lynn's asked us to have a paper or report, some presentation come fall.
It's so that we can try to have some impact on the next LRTP. So better than aiming for too soon rather than too late. And so and maybe something we can do is carve out some time in each meeting for us to have some little discussion about people's ideas for that. But John's in the lead, so and so I'll check in with John a couple of weeks before we put together the agenda to see what he wants on the agenda. And but I won't do it for next month. Just give me the idea a little time to build momentum. Maybe good if we could have maybe 10-15 minutes minimum on the agenda for the April meeting. So there we go.
So to be clear, it's not big ideas for regional transit authorities. It's sort of like two separate things: big ideas and regional transit authorities. So I'm thinking about regional transit authorities, not so big, and John's thinking about big ideas and being more proactive.
Right.
And I just put my email into the chat for those that don't have it. For anyone who wants to play in this particular sandbox, be in touch and we can move forward.
And the big ideas can be about RTAs, not exclusive. It can incorporate the RTAs. Because I mean, that's I think one of the more challenging problems, or let me rephrase that. I think it's one of our biggest challenges. How to make the RTAs more successful because they're dealing in a low density environment, which is not a transit friendly environment. And let me just toss in when you asked about AVs earlier. Kate Victor actually ran the working group on autonomous vehicles way back in, I think maybe 2017, 18, 19. And I never quite saw the final report on that. I don't know if there was, and so I keep thinking, how do I ask Kate that question, in a way that's not, bring up bad memories, so I'll figure it out. So with that, any old business, new business? Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that line on the agenda there, Matt. Yeah, it's just so tiny print for me.
I just wanted to, just thought people would, oh, you mean that it was there?
Yeah,
I just thought people would think we were coming up with bigger ideas than we were with RTAs.
Andy?
So for some of the other municipal folks on here, we had a meeting earlier this morning that I'm just going to repeat myself, but for folks who aren't municipal staff, I just wanted to let folks know, I think before the pandemic, I mentioned that the National Association of City Transportation Officials was going to have a conference that would come to the region in 2020. And of course, 2020 happened and we did not have anything happen in 2020 like that. That conference, I was just told recently that it is going to take place in September of this year, from the 7th to the 10th. I've dropped a link in the chat. There's a bunch of exciting things happening with NACTO, which is the organization that is. And, because it's going to be here, encourage folks to check it out, check out some of the previous conferences to see what the topics are. I think it's a much more engaging conference than other conferences that exist out there. There's like walks and dinners and all that stuff is part of the agenda. And so, there might be opportunities for folks that are interested in transportation to learn about what's going on around the country and even in parts of Canada, because NACTO has Canada cities as part of it. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Len.
I like long walks and talking about transportation. It just sounds like a nice ad. So David?
Yeah, I just put in a plug for one of the challenges I've been having with these meetings. I just want to confess is that I historically have used the minutes of our meetings as a way of keeping track of what we've done and sort of what ground have we covered, and we really have kind of lost touch with those things. And I'm not saying that to be a scold. I understand there may be limited resources to do it, but if we're not going to use the minutes that way, I worry that we don't have a way of sort of knowing what ground we've covered, what decisions or consensus viewpoints we've come to over the course of time. And so then when we seek to sort of represent what we think we believe, where do we find that except in our own personal memories? So I just throwing that out there, and maybe that's part of the big ideas thing. So
No, I hear you, David. Let's talk. Because I share frustration, and maybe you can give me some guidance on how to deal with it. So yeah, it's not for lack of thinking about it on my part. It's really a matter of like, how do I come at it with what I think I know? So why don't I talk with you about this, tell you what I think I know, and then you can give me some advice. Okay.
Whatever.
So
yeah, I'm not trying to take anybody. I just confessing that I now feel less on top of things than I used to, because I don't have that tool at my disposal.
I hear you. And then there's compliance issues. And so for all that, we try to do about OML, this is like it's an issue, but we're not called on it. So, but yeah, so there is that little thing, so I hear you. Thanks for bringing it up. I'm not at all upset, so thank you. And I'd love to talk with you about this and anything else, because we haven't talked in a while, David, and you know how much I enjoy doing that, so it's 4:15, so unless someone really has something they have to add, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to say something quickly.
Okay, Barry.
Before we were talking about transportation planning, perhaps there should be a publication of some nature saying a layman's guide to initiatives and local public transportation. In other words, where do you go?
Okay, that's an idea. And so, can you also give us a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion. Anyone want to second me?
You got second, and I think without any objection, as the MPO does it, we are adjourned. Thanks, and